We are about ready to welcome the students, the staff, the student athletes, and faculty at UC Davis. Welcome to our home. This is going to be just like we started out, a very casual, connected conversation where we can all get together and talk about some pretty important issues. First and foremost, a discussion about preventing sexual violence on college campuses. I'd like to start tonight by sharing that our conversation is championed by John Stamos. He gave this forum a shout out on Instagram today, and he wanted to send along his commitment to making resources available to survivors through our Courage First and Childhelp hotline collaboration, which is coming soon, but he's really excited about it. He's had a bunch of conversations kind of offline with me about supporting Me Too, supporting people coming forward. He's really committed to it as a new father, as a new husband. And so I think that this conversation touches his heart as well. For everyone listening, I'm Daphne Young, Chief Communications Officer at Childhelp. I've been with the organization for 10 years. We are the largest, longest running national nonprofit dedicated to the intervention, the treatment, and the prevention of child abuse. And we realize that every abused child needs support to become, like some of our panel here today, some of us here in the room, a brave survivor. And we are honored to host survivors this evening. This event was born out of a partnership of UC Speaks Up and Courage First in an effort to prevent abuse and offer resources to those who might need it the most. I wanted to offer a special thank you to wonderful partners at UC Davis and UCLA, Dr. Jennifer Wagman, Camila Tan, Mina Razize, and Rashni Desai. So we want to thank you guys for organizing this wonderful event, and we are so grateful for your contributions. We're also hosting this discussion to celebrate the United Nations 16 Days of Activism Against Gender Violence campaign. We are here to educate. We are here to create awareness and engage with a really difficult topic. And we need all voices to speak up for those who are silenced by abuse. UC Speaks Up and Courage First are continuing to host these virtual screening events across the University of California campuses. So if you guys are interested in hosting a screening and discussion for your class or organization, please email Camila Tan. Her address is available in the chat box, so check that out, and it will be included as well in a follow-up email. So tonight's discussion, in all honesty, can be very triggering. So we want you to practice some self-care. This is a super safe space. Everyone here has been either doing this work or knows what it's like to be on the other end of tough times. And so we're safe, and we want your questions to come in, but practice self-care during this. Get up and walk around a little bit if you need to. Ground yourself on the floor. Take some deep breaths. Visit ucspeaksup.org for /resources. You can visit care.ucdavis.edu/find-resources, or you can call or text or chat with the Childhelp National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. Our hotline is staffed exclusively with degree crisis counselors. They're available 24/7, totally anonymous. And whether you need resources in your area, or let's say afterwards, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you're thinking about At the Heart of Gold, you're thinking about our discussion, maybe you're remembering some past trauma, you've got someone to talk to, and you can just be chatting or texting away and look like you're doing your homework to your roommate and be having a pretty intimate conversation with a crisis counselor. So all of this is available to you tonight, and we really want your participation. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please enter them using the Q&A feature. It's right there at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer them. And after tonight's event, you'll be sent a short survey, and that's really crucial in ongoing research to help prevent sexual violence. So by filling out that survey, you're going to be entered to win one of many cool prizes, but your voice will also help what all of us do here to move forward in the research to help survivors. So I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel right now. We've got a great group of folks here, and you should get to know them. So Sarah Meredith is the care director at UC Davis, a certified sexual assault and domestic violence counselor, and a graduate of the California Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training Master Instruction Certification course. So that's a lot to say, and I think she's going to have a lot to say as well. She is passionate about working with survivors and advocating through violence prevention education. Trinea Gonczar, you heard a little bit about her day-to-day starting out. She's making it through COVID, thriving with her family, and she is a gymnast from Lansing, Michigan, a survivor of Larry Nassar, and an advocate for sexual violence prevention and supporting survivors. She is currently the Director of Development for Wayne County SAFE in the city of Detroit, where she lives with her husband and her sons. Dr. Stephen Ungerleider is a sports psychologist. He's an author of 6 books and co-founder of the Foundation for Global Sports Development and Sidewinder Films. He has produced award-winning documentaries, including At the Heart of Gold, which we hope you were able to view prior to our discussion. And Dr. Ungerleider competed as a collegiate gymnast for the University of Texas at Austin. And on a personal note, I had a pleasure of working with Stephen on Childhelp Speak Up Be Safe for Athletes program, underwritten by the Foundation for Global Sports Development. And I can share that that program reached over 160,000 children, parents, and coaches with training on preventing abuse in youth athletics. So in addition to these discussions that we're having right now, Foundation is trying to stop the next generation of children from having to endure what the courageous survivors experienced at the Heart of Gold. So this is, again, as I said, a safe space when you consider that everyone in this room wants to ensure, this virtual room wants to ensure that our kids are safe, the next generation is taken care of. So please know that your voice in tonight's talk can help inform these efforts as we reach kids from Little League to teens and high school baseball to college basketball players and Olympic gymnasts. Your voice is their courage. So Sarah, I think I'd just like to start with you, since you guys are so instrumental in putting all of this together. You're parting an amazing partnership here. So let's talk directly to our student listeners in this virtual room. Why do you do the work that you do? And what kind of resources are available to these students listening and to the friends on the campuses across your system?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this fabulous event. I guess the short answer to the question of why do I do what I do is that I was called to do this work about 18 years ago. I always tell people that I did not dream of being a victim advocate as a child. This was not the career path that I thought I was going to be on. I sort of fell into the work and loved it from the beginning and decided to just stay with it. I started working in rape crisis and domestic violence work about 18 years ago at a small nonprofit in South Lake Tahoe. And so over the course of many years, ended up making my way to UC Davis about 10 years ago, 10 and a half years ago. And started working for what was then called the Campus Violence Prevention Program and now is called CARE. And so there's a CARE office at every UC campus now as of 2015. There's a similar program that does the same work at every UC campus, including UC Hastings. So in terms of resources for students at UC Davis specifically, the CARE program at UC Davis provides confidential, free victim advocacy for any student and or employee who's experienced sexual harassment, sexual assault, intimate partner violence, or stalking. And when we say confidential, we are confidential both within the UC system-wide sexual violence, sexual harassment policy. So we are not responsible employees under the policy. We do not have to report numbers to Clery. We do not have to report information to Title IX unless the client that we're working with is asking us to help them go through that process. So we don't disclose any information about our clients without their signed release of information. We also do not disclose information about our clients to law enforcement or to people's parents or their partners or other folks without their permission. So we are really dedicated to making sure that we pass along all information about survivor rights and options. We want to help with safety planning. We want to help with crisis intervention and getting folks connected with counseling or therapy in their local community, wherever they happen to be at this moment. Whether that's in Davis, we have students that are all across the state right now who may be engaged in remote learning. So even though we're in a remote setting at this time, we are still very much providing services. If or when somebody chooses to make a report, if that's something that the survivor would like help doing, we will help them every step of the way. So whether that's through the Title IX process or through the criminal justice process. Survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, and stalking have certain rights to have an advocate accompany them to various interviews or various processes. And so we will go with them to those interviews, whether they're in person or remote. And then a lot of students, as you might imagine, also sometimes need assistance with communicating with their faculty or their coaches, or assistance in getting moved into a different dorm, other kinds of accommodations, just so that they can stay focused on their education. And so we'll help navigate some of those rights and options with them as well. So that's a little bit about some of the resources. I won't spend a ton of time there, but if folks have any specific questions, I'm happy to answer that.
I think it's amazing. And I remember in the late 80s, early 90s, in combat boots and baby doll dress, if you remember those looks, marching with Women Take Back the Night to try to get campus services for survivors, for women in crisis, for women and men who are rape survivors. And it was so tough. And so people listening today who are in school, who may take that for granted, please know that it was just a couple of decades ago that we didn't have as robust services. And so to hear what you guys are doing, so proactive, but still breaking ground with this stuff is amazing. So for all of you in this system, you really have strong advocates right now. And if anything happens, you have someone to talk to that respects your voice and will keep you safe. Trinea, I know that this has been quite a journey for you. I know when we hear about these services and all of the opportunities available to young women, that sometimes we can look back and think, wow, how great it would have been to have that kind of advocacy. And I was wondering if you'd be able to tell us a little bit about your experience as a survivor and how it impacted the work, your decisions and sort of the work that you do today.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm one of the survivors of the Larry Nassar case, and we were in such a public platform that I think most people assumed that we had resources, that people were lining up, there were therapists ready and waiting, and that really wasn't the case. So in my experience and the way that I found the work that I'm in now, was also by accident, and I kind of fell into it. I definitely didn't wake up thinking I'm going to work in sexual violence or sexual assault, especially not after my impact statement. I didn't know what I needed, and people kept asking me that, like, what do you guys need? And I had no idea. I didn't have an answer. So I started doing my own research, like, what is available? Is there anyone out there to help us? Like, are there resources? How do we access that? And I took it upon myself and found Wayne County Safe. So we're the Sexual Assault Forensics Examiners Program for the city of Detroit. So if you're familiar with the untested rape kits, there were 11,341 that were untested rape kits that were found in an abandoned warehouse in the city of Detroit. It's in another documentary as well that's called I Am Evidence, and that was my organization. Still, every week we facilitate those meetings with those survivors and their notifications that their test is, or their kit is being tested, and that they have an option if they'd like to proceed with that. So we're very similar into what Sarah does. We provide all services. We support them every step of the way. Every service of ours is free, but we do everything from a 2-week-old to an 108-year-old. We have no parameters as far as age. But really for me, I realized that as a survivor, not knowing what I need and not knowing where to find what I needed, there's a lot of others out there that are in the same boat. And in my case, there were hundreds that had no idea what to do next, and still sometimes don't know what to do or how to find someone, or is there a therapist that's trauma informed, or is there an attorney that's trauma informed? Is there a doctor that we can go to that's familiar with sexual assault, letting a teacher know, or a coach, or there's so many levels to sexual assault, and it takes so much out of somebody, and it's a never-ending journey. So I really recognize that for me, that if I was feeling that way, that others were feeling that way, and if I was finding resources, then I was going to start making sure that everybody else in my community knew about those resources. So in sexual assault, most cases you're anonymous. And in my case, I'm very not anonymous. There's no going back for me. There was no going back for me after my impact statement. And I recognize that. So instead of shying away from that space, I took it upon myself to use my voice and help any single person at any stage of their journey, to make sure that they knew that I was going to be there, and that I would find anyone or help support them, like learning about Sarah and their organization and care, and starting that toolkit essentially of who and where those resources are. So started my journey at Wayne County Safe, and now we're in the process, hopefully, of building like a true sexual assault center. So in my experience, one of our survivors had attempted suicide the night that she did her impact statement, and then a week later attempted suicide for a second time. And I really realized at that point that people were thinking she was crazy. Like, she's this young girl, she did her impact statement, and she was being put in an institution or a space where they were having people that really truly have mental health issues, and she's being more traumatized by being in that situation than actually getting the help that she needed. So we're in the process of building a center and really bringing the model that we have, very similar to care, to as many cities as we can, and eventually as many countries as we can. Because in my experience, after my impact statement, I had about 1,000 messages in my inbox on Facebook asking me what they should do, or telling me that they didn't kill themselves today because of my impact statement, and it gave them hope that they could speak out against their abuser. And I had no preparation for that. So from a trauma space, I didn't know how to respond and appropriately respond. I had no words of advice. I didn't know what to tell them. So I just recognized those missing components for survivors, and that I really wanted to make some change. That's kind of how I'm here.
Amazing. And in a way, your voice, your impact statement was almost all the response that they needed, right? Because some people will ask survivors, like, why do you go into this? Like, don't you want to get away from this issue? And you don't get away from the issue. It lives within your heart and your life and your mind so often, that when you're actually working to help others, there's a healing process that happens for the survivor, but also the new survivor, the person that's just finding their voice, who's watched your impact statement but doesn't have their own impact statement written or even thought out the first step, because you took 50 steps, right? And so it's huge what you're doing. And then to get fully educated, and then to be able to actually offer that response is tenfold, because now they've got the trust and belief in you, step one, and then you have the knowledge to give to them, step two. So it's an amazing journey.
Thank you.
And Stephen, you've helped these women share their story. And I have to say, one of the most beautiful things about At the Heart of Gold is talk about a non-exploitive film that truly gives victims the voice, that puts the victims first and the perpetrators much further back in the story, so that it's about empowerment and moving forward. And I wonder, as one of the, you're the co-founder, obviously, of Foundation for Global Sports Development. And I was wondering if there's anything that kind of sticks in your mind, sticks out as impactful in your production process, because this is quite a labor of love for you.
Yeah, thanks, Daphne, and thanks for your kind words. It's really good to see you. We've worked together for years, and I want to thank you and Trinea, of course, who I know very well, and Megan is anchoring this, and Melanie and our entire team. It took a whole village. This was a huge project. I've been a psychologist for over 40 years and been in the sports medicine field for most of that time, worked with the Olympic Committee and the International Olympic Committee and Paralympic Committee, as well as other sports federations in different capacities. Yeah, it was a very, very tricky project to navigate. We had the core group from Global Sports, which are psychologists and lawyers and social scientists and experts there, and then we had the film group. So there was a mesh of real terrific talent, and of course, when you're doing a film, when you're going down that path into all sorts of creative endeavors, there's a lot of ego and a lot of points of view. And I must say, I think we're very blessed in that over the 4 years, we, for the most part, got along very well and agreed to disagree. And it was a wonderful, wonderful team effort. And speaking to your point, Daphne, I think we were very careful in how to navigate the space around survivors and around the sister survivors, and getting to know them prior to just doing a film or saying, we're doing a film and then we're out of here, which I think is often the case. I had to wear lots of hats as a licensed psychologist. I have an ethical fiduciary responsibility to make sure that I honored informed consent and confidentiality. And there were some women who said, yeah, I'm happy to talk. And this is the first time I've ever spoken. In fact, my partner or my parents or my children don't even know what happened to me. So this is a really, really precarious place for me. And I said, you don't have to do this. If you want to talk about it, that's great. We can get you help, any type of support. And when it comes to the film time, I'm speaking of pre-interviews, which I did many of. I said, you don't have to be on the air. You can withdraw at any point. So we really wanted to honor the sister survivors and their wishes. And so I think that was important. And then navigating, working with the team and making sure that everybody was on the same page. One of the great blessings about doing this film is that we had a great partner with HBO. We were very blessed, and the film was offered many opportunities with many, many film outlets. And we chose HBO because we felt they chose us, and then we reciprocated and said, yes, our contract's going to go with you. And one of the reasons we did that, as opposed to Netflix or ESPN or Showtime or something like that, was that HBO has a history of not only doing great films and getting them out on a platform. And by the way, we're coming up on a year and a half, and our film has been seen by over 8 million people, both domestic and international. And I've received letters and emails and phone calls from all over the world commenting about it, and for the most part, people being very gracious about, we'd love to use it for education purposes. HBO believes that it's not all about the film and making money. They really were honoring our request to take the film, besides being used on television, but to use it in college settings, in community settings, places like Trinea at Wayne County Works, in front of sporting groups, parent groups, PTA, and actually have a live in vivo situation where the film is shown, and then there's a panel, and I've served on several panels with Trinea, who's just been amazing, and other sister survivors, where we get to do the Q&A. And being there live with a panel and hearing the questions and hearing people get up and ask things and having the Q&A, it was really, really a special moment for me. I think one of the most powerful moments in my 43 years as a professional psychologist, because we got to know what people were thinking. You don't get that over TV. You hear maybe through the grapevine that somebody liked your film, but to hear people ask and talk about their stories and talk about what happened on a college campus or what happened in a gym somewhere, and then ask us, how do you deal with this? So we were on the road for a whole year pre-COVID. And then when COVID hit, we've taken this virtual, which we are tonight. And I feel very blessed that the film lives on, our message lives on, and that we are providing a platform for people to be able to talk to us. We can talk to them. And as Daphne said, offer interventions and services. And I really hope that we can continue this dialogue. Dr. Wagman has been amazing at anchoring this with UCLA, and Sarah's been incredible, and we're hoping to continue this dialogue. But yeah, overall, it's probably really the most powerful, impactful project in my professional career.
That's so great to hear. I was at some of those screenings, and one of the things that you mentioned, and one of the most powerful things I saw as well, is these women who are self-defined as sister survivors, just holding each other's hands, crying together, hugging each other, feeling empowered together, answering questions, and taking their experience to help other people. And I could just, being in the room, watching them watch the film, was a very powerful moment. And then to see how they took that advocacy outside of the film. So as you describe it, it's kind of a living picture. It's something you all created, but it also created a life of its own that's helping other people above and beyond just learning about the facts of this film. And I know that, one of the things that you guys wanted to address was a lot of misconceptions or stigmas around sexual violence. Why don't they tell? Why don't they come forward? And I wanted to ask Sarah what she sees as a misconception that she often sees in the field, because that's something that the Heart of Gold really tried to get beyond. So what are some of the misconceptions that you've seen in your work?
Yeah. I was teaching a class yesterday and just had this experience. I think one of the things that comes up maybe most often, and I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but I think that there's a common misconception out there that if all these girls would just make better choices, then we wouldn't have sexual violence. And it's infuriating. So I've been doing the work for long enough now, and I've heard that comment often enough that I'm usually pretty prepared with a response of, well, if we could get the perpetrators to stop perpetrating, then we wouldn't have sexual violence. So I think that we've come a long way in our understanding of what primary prevention means in the field of sexual violence prevention. And I still struggle with I don't want to say struggle with folks who are really beholden to risk reduction strategies. I think that there's a place for risk reduction and harm reduction, but I think we're not going to get anywhere in our prevention work if we're not actually looking at changing the culture and primary prevention. So I think in terms of misconceptions, the idea that somehow if women just behaved differently, or if the victims had just behaved in a different way, that it wouldn't have happened. I also hear sort of along the same lines, the expectation that every survivor should report or is going to report, and that somehow will magically be the answer. It will end with the perpetrator going to jail and the sexual violence stopping and the victim having all the support that they need and the healing process being smooth. And you know, the reality is that that's not everybody's experience of a reporting process. And even some reporting processes, once they get to a point where there is a conviction and people are believing the survivors, sometimes it doesn't start off that way. It takes a long time for people to get on board and for those survivors to get the support that they deserve and need. So I think those are probably two of the most common misconceptions that I feel like I hear in general around the community, and just even sometimes from survivors themselves, just their own expectations of feeling what they should do or that they have to do. Yeah, I think those are,
you know, the importance of reporting, and yet what often happens to women who come forward, which is stigma, which is excessive questions, which is being put in a spotlight, whether it's the Trinea level spotlight, which is the world watching, or whether it is just the spotlight of your family and your community and how stressful that can be. And to your point, you know, we focus on risk reduction. Well, why don't we focus on reducing the ability for perpetrators to not only do this, but to get away from it, to get away with it, and then to put you know, the survivors in the spotlight as if they did something wrong. And so when we've seen all of this movement, the Me Too, these hashtags of women who are sometimes admitting, you know, not in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, sometimes women in their 80s and 90s finally saying, I don't even know how to use this Twitter thing, but it happened to me. And my granddaughter's here helping me say Me Too.
yeah.
This is critical information for people that ask that question, why don't you come forward? Because coming forward sometimes makes you a victim twice. And
Can I just add something, Daphne? I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to say the biggest thing that I had in my experience was realizing that the way that my case went is not how it goes in any cases in reality. Like and I had to sit in that space because I was ready to fight for justice, and in some cases it's the father, or in some cases it's the uncle, or in some cases it's the husband, or in some cases it's the mom. I mean, it's not just women that this happens to, and so there's so many misconceptions about sexual violence. And in my experience, what I've learned is my case is not how it happens ever. And this was in such a monumental situation, and it was so opposite of what 99% of survivors actually go through. And that was really hard for me because I didn't know my privilege in that space. I didn't understand what was happening, but I really had to learn and also take a step back and recognize, okay, like what my situation doesn't mean I'm an expert in how to help others, because this isn't how it really happens in real life. So I'm just gonna put that there, because I know that our experience, especially getting the justice that we got, isn't always the way that it goes.
But you're putting that out there as a gift to survivors. You're saying, you may see something in my experience that's going to give you a lot of empowerment and excitement, and this may not happen for you. Your judge, Akalana, was like the dream, right? This is exactly how somebody should step up for survivors. But guess what? You may have a judge that doesn't get you, that doesn't understand the issue, and you may walk out of that courtroom feeling like you shared an impact statement and it fell on deaf ears.
Yeah.
And just to tell people that, to show them there's an ideal here, but it may not work for you, is a cultural shift. And even for survivors, I mean, what a gift to say, as a survivor, I understand my privilege. And, you know, there's something that you have insight into. Sarah was talking about cultural shifts. And I wonder what kind of educational or athletic cultural scenarios contribute to these issues, and what kind of culture can foster healing. So we know that there's something in the culture of athletics. Like I was talking to Dr. Stephen Ungerleider one time about, you know, grooming for the Olympics, and then also how we use grooming at Childhelp, grooming a child for abuse. And so what do you see in the athletic or the educational culture that contributes to abuse? And then how do we combat that? What can we do to foster healing?
Is that Stephen?
Is
That's
this,
you. That's to Trinea.
Me?
I- let me,
Right?
let me,
We're in athletics, but Stephen, I think
let me
Stephen.
just, let me just jump in for a second, because Trinea made an outstanding point, and it really is true. It comes in all shapes and colors, and it's not all one. We were very blessed to have the experience, and all of you, to see Judge Aquilina work the way she does. And she and I have become very, very good friends since the film. I did not know her prior, and we were very blessed. It's not every day that a federal judge will allow you into her courtroom to not only film. We were the only film crew allowed. There was some CNN people and still photographers, but we were the only private. So that was a blessing. And then you saw that we had some private time outtakes with her. And we have tons of other footage. She was incredibly generous and gracious. And what I learned, one of the many things I learned, was that she's been doing this for years as a jurist, for 25 years. She has been honoring and encouraging victim impact statements for all her cases. And this is not the norm. I mean, this is not always the norm. Often a judge will say, yeah, I want to hear you, but we don't have a lot of time, so I want you to write your statement, or I'll give you a couple minutes. What she did, and you heard, was to allow every sister survivor to come forward, and if it took a week or 2 weeks, the trial was going to continue. There was no cutoff. And she took some heat from her colleagues, and they said, gee, Judge Rose, aren't you going a little bit far on this? And she said, no, this is the way I want to honor the victims. I want them to know this is a safe place, and they can come here and they can make their statements and look at this criminal and say what they have suffered. So that was an absolute blessing and a great learning experience for me, and then getting to know her and be on panels with her. But I think it's important for our audience to know that that is not always the norm. And she has been speaking since the film came out, to law enforcement and law schools and attorney generals around the United States about why it's so important to allow the victim impact and allow survivors to come forward and not be re-victimized in a criminal justice setting. So this was a great moment for us as a learning tool, and also for us to be able to be able to film her.
And I think people are going to study that footage that you guys captured and the footage from those trials in the future to learn how to deal with these types of cases, because she was a class act study in how to honor the legal system and do it by the book, and be judicious and thoughtful and careful, but not let a single person walk out of that courtroom not feeling like they had an opportunity to have their say. And I think when I was talking to Trinea about the cultural issue, and Sarah as well, about what athletics foster, and Stephen, you were an athlete as well. I mean, you guys know this is a culture of win. It's often individual, meeting their best time, their best talent. It's suck it up, get back out there. You turned your ankle, do another course of gymnastics, do another run, hit another ball. And so a lot of that is about personal power. And then it's very hard then to come forward and say, I was hurt, I am vulnerable, I am scared. in a culture where so much is pumped up about being strong, being brave, and so I think what I like about Courage First is we're kind of redefining courage around here. It's not about being able to play through hurt or suck it up and deal with abusive treatment or bullying or the very awful truth of abuse in sports, but it's about courage of your voice, courage to come forward, courage to support others. And so, Sarah, I know that you're dealing with cultural issues, just as they would be dealing with it in sports. You're dealing with it on the campus front, and there are some, I guess, some barriers in Title IX for student victim protection. And I wonder if you could illuminate some of those, and also talk about some improvements we can make.
Yeah. Well, the fact that Betsy DeVos is not going to have a job in January is going to be a huge improvement. So I'll just go ahead and put that out there. I don't know how popular that is with everybody else, but I'm going to own it. So honestly, I think one of the biggest barriers is that it's an administrative process. And I think, with criminal justice process as well, but it's all written and run by lawyers. And so it becomes really confusing and convoluted. I was just reading a letter that came out from our Title IX office to a student who's getting ready to go through a Title IX process. And it's 5 pages of legal disclaimers and, information about what the process is going to look like. But you almost need a law degree to kind of decipher what it says. And it's all in there because universities they're required to by some of these regulations to make sure that there are certain statements that are included in every sort of every notification that goes out. So I think one of the biggest barriers is that it's confusing. There's a lot of misinformation about what's involved in a reporting process, in a Title IX reporting process. The UC system took the stance of keeping our sexual violence, sexual harassment policy almost exactly the same, but there's now this added appendix. So they have to evaluate if the conduct that's being reported, is it DOE covered conduct? Is it Department of Education covered conduct that falls under the regulations? And then it sort of takes another little path. So I know when the regulations were first coming out, there was a lot of concern and question about whether or not Title IX would still be able to address allegations of sexual violence that happened off campus, because the new regulations really focus on just covering things that happen on campus owned property. The UC system does have a mechanism for addressing conduct that happens off campus, but it goes through a little bit of a different route. So that's probably one of the biggest things that I see in terms of barriers. I feel really lucky that we have a lot of campus support for the CARE program. And one of the things that we do most often is try to help folks understand what that process looks like and help break it down for them a little bit, navigate some of the legalese. But there's a lot of pieces of the Title IX process and the reporting process in general that, for survivors, depending on where they're at in their healing process and what they'd like to have as an outcome, it can be really daunting to find out that you're going to have to talk to an investigator and you're going to have to describe in detail everything that happened. They're going to question you about it. The person who harmed you is also going to know everything that you've said, and they're going to pose questions. And at some point there might be a hearing where that other person who harmed you is going to be there. And while they may not be questioning you directly, there's going to be somebody sitting next to them questioning you. And that piece of that just constantly being questioned in and of itself can be a barrier. So I understand the need for due process. I get it. I would be happy to have it if I was ever in a situation where I needed it. But I always say I get paid to be on one side of this. So I would love to have a process where we could just believe survivors and not put them through so many hoops of being questioned over and over and over. So those are probably two of the biggest barriers that I think come up for folks in the process itself.
It's such a painful process, and at Childhelp, one of the gifts that we give our kids is to tape that first story with a trained forensic interviewer, so that child doesn't have to tell the story again and again and again. Because as you see with survivors, it is a re-victimization process every time you have to go through that traumatic event. And you know, we have students here, and you've heard Sarah as an amazing resource, and Trinea, I'm thinking about students that may be on the cusp of something scary, where you know, we saw at the Heart of Gold highlighting different elements of grooming, and so you have people watching us right now who you know, you saw the gift giving, the texting, the inappropriate social media interaction, the weird imbalance of power, imbalance of knowledge, you know, the trusted authority figure. There are all these elements, and I wonder if you could share, you know, almost tapping into your mom self as well as your professional self, as well as that survivor. What are some kinds of grooming that college students or student athletes should watch out for?
I think personally, now that I'm a little more educated in this space, isolation, someone that's kind of isolating that person, maybe meaning that they only want to spend time with just them, and that they don't want to be in a group setting. Their conversations are always private. Everything's behind closed doors. They're asking them to keep secrets. They become very retracted in their behavior as you know them. So they're kind of going inwards instead of feeling empowered, and they're in a good relationship and it seems healthy, and also a little bit of instinct. If something feels, that's what I tell my family, if something feels off, if your hairs stick up for some reason, trust that. Like if something doesn't seem right with your friend or in your situation, and you don't really know why, you know, take a step back and just let that situation explore in your head as maybe something is wrong here. Because I know in my situation, I was the perfect groomed victim. I mean, like textbook. I silenced other survivors. I didn't know what I didn't know, and now as I look back, especially as a mom, I think that the biggest fear that parents have is how to handle it. If you think you see a child that maybe is acting irregular, or there's a behavior or a friend or a family member that's something different, is how do you, what do you do? What do you say? And I think that for me, as I would go forward now, is just simply saying, like, I see you. I know something is a little off, and I just want you to know I'm here when you're ready. Because I think that there is a power and control of grooming that the person that's retracting and becomes a little less themselves, it's because their power is being essentially taken, and you giving that gives them an opportunity to go back to themselves, and gives them an opportunity to find that journey for themselves. Because I think that, again, it's the power and control, and really the groomer, the predator is intentional about the way that they're grooming, and they're really trying to make that victim less and less with their family and their friends, and getting them to be more secretive and private about things. So I think trusting your instinct. If something feels off, it probably is, and noticing the people in your life, if there's a drastic change in behavior and they seem retracted, you know, taking a look at who's in their life, because you never know. A lot of times it's someone much closer to them than you think. It's not always the white van driving down the street, or the person that's new to their life. Sometimes, in most cases, it's somebody that's working intentionally to get them in that space. So
one of the most heartbreaking things I sometimes have to tell folks is beware of feeling really accomplished and really special, because in athletics and academics, a person of power can pull you aside and say, Trinea, you could really be the gold winner. You could be it. Forget some of these other guys. You know, they play into one's feeling of like, I could be accomplished. I could get further. You know, hey Sarah, you know, you're so whip smart. I think you could run this department, but I'm going to need to have some private coaching. You know, and they draw you into that feeling super special. And when someone creates that intimate sense so quickly, it is predatory oftentimes. It's not just about them seeing the light in you. It's often the darkness in them, right, that's coming at you. And then you have to go, you know, people that have gone through that end up seeing someone, you know, in their day like Stephen. And, you know, I have a question for you about the process of coming out of all this. So from a sports psychologist perspective, can you tell us, Trinea's done a great job sort of setting up her process, which she says is atypical in many ways, you know, from the court all the way to her super empowerment of actually helping others. Can you tell us about the trauma and recovery process and how we can support these survivors in healing?
Well, it's very important to get help, as Trinea as mentioned, and to find a support mechanism. As you saw, this was a very, very insidious perpetrator, you know, a first-rate predator. One of the questions we got over and over through emails and in person was, how could this go on so long? How is it that people weren't paying attention, and this guy, this so-called doctor, Nasser, climbed the food chain and worked his way from little Jim, baby Jim, to being the Olympic doctor and going off to Sydney, Australia as the Olympic doctor and going to other Olympic venues and training athletes all over the world. How could this possibly happen? Well, there were a lot of things at play besides him being an excellent groomer and people being in denial. Parents were not listening to their children. As Professor Hamilton said, we don't listen to our children. We have to listen to our children. It's very, very important. The other thing, of course, was there were a host of enablers. You had the Michigan State enablers. You had the other coaches enablers, the assistant coaches who looked the other way. You had the Carolis, two of the most famous coaching institutions in the universe. They came from Romania in the 70s, and they turned the world upside down by creating a system of producing great gymnasts. They also turned the world upside down by being enablers and allowing this grooming behavior to go on. They, of course, have been shut down, and their training center is gone. But we had a number of enablers. And of course, for me, one of the saddest situations is the United States Olympic Committee and USA Gymnastics were huge enablers, and they knew this was going on. In fact, as you saw in our research, which we then put up on the screen, we had a document from 1999. That's what, 21 years ago? 21 years ago, there was a memo from the president of USA Gymnastics to the Olympic Committee and to the General Counsel. 3 different people were named on that, including the chief lawyer for the Olympic Committee, saying, you know, folks, I think we have a problem in gymnastics. There's been some talk about sexual assault, and they didn't use the word grooming, but they used different euphemisms. And so there were some, you know, little, not investigations, but look-see. But for the most part, as we jumped into this and started asking questions, people knew, and they knew for years and years and years. And the Olympic Committee was afraid of lawsuits. Turns out they were engaged in lawsuits, but they hid them, and they had very private deals where they signed off on them and gave money to different families, said, go away, we have a non-disclosure. But they knew, they lied, they were in pathological denial. And one of the things that was very tough for myself and my colleague, David Ulick, was that we went to the president of the Olympic Committee, who you saw on screen, and we said, hey, we met in his office, in headquarters. We said, listen, we've known you for years. We've traveled all over the world with you for the last 7 Olympiads. We know your children. You know my daughters. My daughters both were just, one of them, by the way, trained at the Caroli Ranch, so it hit close to home for me. And we said to Mr. Blackman, hey, we need to put a stop to this. I'm not saying you did this or caused this, but we're all in this together, and we need to put a stop to this. What are you going to do? And his comment to me was, Dr. Stephen, you've been a great advocate for our athletes, for women, for safety in sport. I appreciate you, but you know what? Our lawyers have told us to keep our head down and to keep our mouth shut. And there's nothing I can do. And thank you very much for coming. So that was the first encounter. And then subsequent to that, when we decided to do the film, we felt it was really important to be ethical and be righteous about this. And we went to the Olympic Committee and met with many different people, including the president. And we said, look, we're not going to sneak around, and you're not going to hear this from the New York Times. You're going to hear it from me. We are making this film, and we want you part of this because we want to all be part of the solution. We're all in this together. And they said, look, we're not going to stop you. We're not going to file a lawsuit or anything. But once again, our lawyers have told us to just keep our distance. And so I completely divorced myself in the committee. I quit, I left, and wrote a couple of what we call nasty grams, and said, I think you're making a big mistake. This is a great opportunity for you. And this was a little bit later when the trial was going on, and I asked the president and the board to go to the trial and support the victims. And they said that's the last place we would ever be. So there was some bitterness and tension going on.
You laughed, Stephen, when you said nasty grams. One of the questions that we had put together for Trinea was, what can folks do to support survivors? And you're kind of leading into that 100%, because, everybody wants somebody that doesn't take no for an answer, that goes to the next position of power, that calls out truth to power, that actually writes that nasty gram, puts their name and reputation on the line to say, I'm not going to be part of your lawyers. I'm not going to hang with your group of deniers. I'm going to support these folks that are right now at the bottom of the food chain, because nobody's listening, believing, supporting survivors often, and everybody else has their cushy little comfortable position, right? So they don't want to risk it, and taking that risk is so valuable. And I kind of saw Trinea smile a little bit, because that's kind of what I want to ask her. When you hear Stephen talking about like knocking down doors and writing the nasty gram on behalf of the survivors, that feels good, right? It feels like, hey, somebody's helping us. We're not having to kind of scream out into the void. And I wonder if you had any other advice in this vein of how to support survivors, or if somebody listening has a survivor in their life, maybe they don't have Stephen's go get them to knock down every door, but what can they do for that individual to help out?
There's a lot of different ways to approach it, and everybody's different because healing really has no timeline. So everyone's journey is completely different, and each journey, it could be completely different tomorrow than it is today, and it likely will be. I know from my personal experience, I have become the lady with the bat. So let me at them. I'm ready, and I have Judge Aquilina on my back end if you need to get me out of court, because I'm ready to go at him. So I've gotten that fire, but that fire wasn't always there for me, and it was really dark. And it takes someone every day. It takes intention to finding something that's positive in your life, whether it's yoga, whether it's breathing, whether it's a friend that you can take a walk with. I think that there's intention every day to find something positive, and also to know that it's going to be different every day, and that if the first person you tell doesn't react how you feel that you need from support, go to the next person. And if the next person doesn't do that, then go to the next person, and don't give up, because they are out there, and you do have those support systems around you. You might just not recognize, you think the first person's going to be a certain way, and they don't react how you expect or want them to. So don't stop there. Keep going. And same thing with even with care. If you're in the university and you have a fear of maybe doing something within the university, that's okay. You don't have to go there to get support and help. There are other opportunities, and I'm only saying that because I don't want that to be a reason that somebody doesn't seek help, because it's really important that you do that. And once you take your power back to start doing something to get yourself better in a better place, you can get to be the lady with the bat. I'm totally that lady now. So
the lady with the bat. Now, Sarah, though, when we think about systemic ways to, so we've got the Nasty Graham guy with 6 books and award-winning films. He may not be on your team. We've got the lady with the bat. She may not be on your team. And Judge Aquilana, who we all want on our teams, may not be available. She's available to all of us here, and all these folks are available to us tonight. But when it comes to systemic change and actually rooting it in our university system so that we get this kind of activism and power in a systemic branch of the system, how do you think universities can make campuses safe environments for survivors?
Yeah. As I'm listening to folks chiming in and talking about their advocacy, one of the things that I'm always really keenly aware of is that most of the time survivors aren't necessarily reaching out directly to advocates or law enforcement or Title IX folks or even therapists as their first point of contact. They're usually going to a friend or somebody close to them that they know and they trust. And that's usually the very first person who gets the disclosure. So I'll often go into spaces on campus when we were actually able to be in spaces on campus. But in any training or education I do, I always want to convey to the attendees that, they are more likely to get a disclosure first than I am to get that disclosure first. And that many of our clients, many of the students that come to CARE are usually prompted to come to CARE because they've talked to a friend and the friend has said, let me get you to a resource. And so for any of the attendees that are watching, you have such power in your response to anybody who comes to you who discloses that something might be a little off, that they feel like their relationship doesn't feel quite right, that something happened that they're not really sure was okay. And to listen to that and allow your friend to make the best choice for them, but to point them to resources to help them get to a space where maybe they can get a little bit more information or support. Don't question, what happened. You don't need to know all of the details. You're not the investigator. I always say, the investigators get paid to do a job, so you don't need to be the investigator to find out all of the facts before you decide you're going to believe your friend. And just don't blame the victim. I know that sounds, obvious, but I hear this from our survivors on campus a lot, where even within their social circle, they're sometimes questioned or blamed for the abuse or the assault that's happened to them. So if somebody is struggling with that even in themselves, like trying to figure out what do I say to a survivor, there's some information on our website about how to help. There's other resources out there that give good tips on how to help. So that's one thing that I would strongly recommend for folks. And then just in general, I won't belabor the point, but there are a number of folks on campus who are working on looking at policy, environmental structures, reporting structures, all of those things. Where are the areas that we can really start to implement primary prevention? What kinds of institutional factors can we play up or tweak so that we have a better culture? So I won't belabor the point on that, but it's fascinating work.
No, and I think, one of the key things that we have been teaching children through the program that we've done with Global Sports is at the end of each of our lectures, we say, it is never your fault. Abuse is never your fault. And we had a little girl crying whose perpetrator was in jail. Everything was solved in her case, but her family was still blaming her for putting an uncle in jail. One of our brothers is in jail because of you. And she just cried, and she came forward to our facilitator, which the FGSD team knows very well, Lisa Cioli, and she just cried in her arms. And that counselor finally understood why that little girl was slipping in grades, why she didn't come to class sometimes, why she acted out. And so she was able to get services just in understanding it's not your fault. So victim blaming is at the heart. If you can do nothing better than just not blame that person and be a listening ear and not offer tons of advice, but just listen and say, I can't believe that happened to you. That breaks my heart. You deserve so much better. You deserve protection. Is there anything I can do to help? If you just want to call me sometimes and talk, that's cool too. And just be calm and supportive. I thank you guys so much for this, like a wealth of information that you're giving us. And we do have a couple questions from the faculty and student athletes that are joining us. I also want to remind them that they can pop some questions into chat right now, and we'll also capture those. But one of them was, and I believe this is for Trinea, as it's been examined in multiple ways, the questioner asks, there are any number of reasons why survivors often take a while before coming forward. What new mechanisms have been implemented, both at educational and institutions and within the legal system, to allow survivors to feel more empowered to report their experiences in a timely manner? So have there been any changes? And maybe this is for any of the panel members as well who may have a piece of this story, but what are some things that are happening at the educational and legal levels that allow survivors to feel more empowered to report their experiences in a timely manner?
Do you want to say? I see you, Sarah.
Yeah, I can offer just a couple of things really quickly. So this is not super new. This has been federal law for a number of years now. But when I first started in advocacy work, if somebody was sexually assaulted and they wanted to go through the evidentiary exam process, they had to report to law enforcement first in order to access that evidentiary exam. And Trinea, you probably can speak to this as well in your role in this, but we now have a process. It's a federally mandated right for survivors of sexual assault to access that evidentiary exam without having to report to law enforcement first. And so this, even in my career, I've seen a number of sexual assault survivors who, they're coming to terms with what has been done to them, and they're not quite ready to report to law enforcement yet, but they might feel compelled to go ahead and have that physical evidence collected just in case, so that it's not lost, 5 days from the assault time. And so we've seen a number of survivors on campus, and even before I got to campus, who will elect to go through the evidentiary exam process. And then sometimes they choose to report to law enforcement and sometimes they don't, but at least they have that kit that has preserved the evidence. And I think that has been something I've seen be really empowering for survivors.
I think that critically important, and to that effect, I think we have a secondary question that also relates to what you're talking about, but in a more personal note, which is a student asking directly about can you inform them a little bit more about UC Care programs and what they offer the community? Because as people are listening and getting more educated about the pieces here, there may be some folks that need real advocacy,
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll try to give a little bit more information about the care program services. So again, we're confidential victim advocates within the program. We're available to students who have experienced sexual harassment, sexual assault, intimate partner violence, or stalking, who want to explore all of their options and their rights. We're not therapists, so we don't do long-term counseling, but we do what's called brief crisis counseling. We spend a lot of time doing safety planning and sort of talking through concerns, fears, concerns that the survivor might have. Folks do not have to decide that they want to report in order to access care services. So we actually have, the majority of the folks that we work with actually don't go through a formal, either a Title IX process or criminal justice process. But sometimes they just want to be able to talk about the impact that the assault or the abuse has had. And they want to be able to talk about it with somebody who's not going to judge. Maybe they haven't found their own support system yet with their friends or their family, and they're still trying to figure out who can they go to that's going to be trustworthy and non-judgmental. Sometimes folks are looking for assistance with their academics. So they're coming to terms with the assault or the abuse that's happened, and they're realizing, they haven't been sleeping, they're not able to focus on their studies, and it's starting to impact their grades. And so we might be able to get them connected with the Student Disability Center for long-term accommodations, or help them with a letter of support for their faculty. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful. We also are on call 24/7. So when I talk about the evidentiary exam process and accompaniments, I'm on call the third weekend of every month, and if there's a call that comes in, sometimes I'll be the one that goes out for the accompaniment to the evidentiary exam. So hopefully that is helpful.
It's hugely helpful, and I think that knowing that there are many 24/7 services out there, because if you want to come forward at any time, day or night, if you need help at any time, day or night, you can't wait. And sometimes it's just that circle of the clock that stops you from talking, that makes you just say, you know what, I can't do this. So I love that it's there when the survivor is ready. And unless we have any more questions in the Q&A, this is kind of your last opportunity to pop a few in there. But we do have a last question, and this is kind of a tough one. This is from a professional in the field asking, hey, I'm an advocate supporting a survivor of a medical doctor at another institution. Now we're looking at somebody who's either a social worker or a lawyer or a psychologist who's supporting a survivor that has been abused by a medical doctor at another institution, a person of power and prestige. What should I be aware of when trying to support a survivor in what has become a high-profile incident? And we have
let me just jump in. It's very interesting. I'm glad this question came up. With the film and our panels and our team of experts, we were approached not only by colleges, universities, athletic venues, schools, whatnot, but we had a number of medical schools that called us and said, hey, you guys, we saw the film, and it's really powerful. And of course, what you bring to the table is the obvious, sexual assault predator. But there's also a very insidious level of power imbalance. And often there is a senior doctor who might be doing something to a first-year medical student, or not a physical thing, but an emotional abuse or something that is hard to diagnose. And several medical schools saying, we're re-evaluating our personnel file as well as our human resources. Would you come and show the film and talk about this balance in power? So we actually did, and it was fascinating because as in every institution, there are systems that are dysfunctional. And in fact, there was a couple situations. We highlighted the Michigan State case in the film. We also talked about the dean of the medical school. Well, that dean, who was the dean when Larry Nassar became a doctor, had received information 30 years ago from other medical students that this guy, Larry, who was not a doctor yet, was acting out, was looking at pornography and doing crazy things, and had warned the dean. Subsequent to that, it blew up, and he was fired, and the medical school was sued, and the entire system, Michigan State, was sued. Subsequent to that, USC has had some issues. There are a number of medical schools around the country that have now gone public with this particular issue, this power imbalance. Now, the only reason I point this out is it can happen anywhere, and it does.
And it's so scary when it happens in a place where you have one of the most trusted professions that is supposed to do no harm, doing so much harm. And one of the things, I guess, from the Childhelp perspective that I would say to somebody who's advocating for someone in this circumstance is that, you know, we spend all of our time, all of us here on this panel spend all of our time telling victims, you know, come forward, share your voice. And then at the moment that you're part of a high profile incident, for a little while, you got to pull your voice back, right? Because you can jeopardize the case. You can speak to media. Your words can be twisted. You can become a focus of a lot of negative social media that can really throw you off balance when it comes time to come forward. So I would say to somebody right now who's working with somebody that's part of a high profile case against a medical doctor, your voice matters in our conversations. It's going to matter like never before on that stand. You are going to speak for so many people. So hold it, get up there, share it with all your heart. And when that predator is behind bars, that's when you're going to post. That's when you're going to write your blog. That's when you're going to write your book. That's when you're going to be like Trinea, an advocate. That's when you're going to be able to be part of a system of change. Well, I have to say, it's just been amazing listening to all of you speak. Lots of different perspectives, which is great. I wonder if any of you have final words. Maybe I'll just kind of go down the panel. Final words you'd like to say to the audience tonight. Stephen, we'll start with you, man of the hour, producer of the hour. What have you got to say to the audience?
Well, first of all, Daphne, thank you. Great anchor, and really appreciate all the good work you're doing at Childhelp. You know, it was a team effort. We had a lot of really good people, and I feel very blessed that I'm surrounded by such a great team. But you know, we have a lot of work to do, and I knew it, but I really learned it after the film came out, and the just tons of emails and correspondence and calls from so many people saying, thanks for doing this. Thanks for opening up that door, but where do we go next? And there's just an enormous amount of work to do in, you know, every venue, including college campuses and sporting venues. So we all have to work very hard and stick together on this.
Well, thank you. Trinea, what would you say to survivors or just anyone listening tonight?
I would say to anybody that's out there that needs to hear this, I see you and I believe you, and you can do this. So if it's not tomorrow, we can look at the next day and the next day, but I'm always a resource, and I'm really happy to help because I've been there. So I see you and you can do it.
Excellent. And Sarah, just from your professional perspective and the work that you do every day, what would you like to share?
Yeah, well, ditto for everything that Trinea said. Yes, for the survivors who are out there, you know, thank you for surviving, and just know that that's all you need to do right now. And there are folks that are here to help you in your healing process when you're ready for that. And then for other folks who are in the community, you know, make sure that you are supporting the folks that are in your community. So don't tell your friends that they must be mistaken about that person who harmed them, that they didn't really mean it. Just believe them and get them the support that they need. If you happen to be older and have kids in your life, regardless of the gender of your child, it's always a good time to start teaching them about bodily autonomy and respect for others, healthy communication, respectful relationships, and prevention at all ages.
I love that. And that's what we've all been doing in this partnership, starting with the real little kids to stop it before it even has a chance, all the way up through survivors who need to be part of that cycle of healing. And before I say thank you and goodbye to folks, I just want to say we got a last minute emailed question, and I actually think I can take this one. This is an interesting thought, asking about how parents and coaches can promote healthy masculine identities in boys instead of teaching them or modeling that violence is a necessary or desired expression of manhood. And I just got that in a text as one of the listeners. And I have had that issue broached by an ESPN interview. And this will be one of the things that Stephen will go nuts about, because somebody actually called me from ESPN trying to get a quote about a football player ruthlessly beating his child, and tried to get me as a representative of Childhelp to say it was okay somehow, that like, hey, you know, kids need to be put in line. Are we raising a nation of wimps? On and on. And I just said, I kind of hear what you're doing, and I'm not giving you the quote. And here's why. I don't believe in putting hands on children. I know that certain spanking is not illegal, but I think that when we teach with violence, we promote violence. When we put our hands on a child, we give that child permission to put their hands on someone in the future. And I said, you know what? You can say wimp or no wimp, but you didn't whip me out or beat me into giving you that quote. And I'll never be able to whip out, you know, a punch in a boardroom. I'll never be able to, you know, smack someone across the face to make my point. So what you do is you raise a nation of insecure young men who act out violently and then have to spend a lifetime trying to find their empathy and their compassion to be able to build healthy relationships. Wouldn't it be amazing to raise them up right? Teach them with love, make them feel confident and amazing and secure, and imagine what they could do in the boardroom, on the sports field, in college. So, you know, I've been on both sides of this debate. I've heard all of the sides, and I really say that, you know, that the strongest thing, you know, here's Trinea raising young boys, the strongest thing you can teach them is, look at mom, she used her voice, she didn't use her hands. She used the strength of her character to create change, and that's what creates fine young men. And then they grow up to be Stephen, and they make movies like At the Heart of Gold. So that's our hope. So I have to thank everyone on behalf of UC Speaks Up, Courage First, the Foundation for Global Sports Development, and Sidewinder Films. And on behalf of Childhelp also, we thank everybody for uniting to stop sexual abuse on campuses and in youth athletics. And we hope that you learn more about the issue and also feel a little bit more empowered to heal up, to help. Please look for the follow-up survey and access ucspeaksup.org/resources, care.ucdavis.edu/find-resources. All of this will be in the chat feature, so you don't have to write it down or memorize. Or call, text, or chat the Childhelp National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453 with our text and chat features. Again, I know we're all quarantining. You can literally be a room away having that important conversation and feeling really safe and being quiet with it until you find your voice that you want to shout from the roof. So at that point, you can grab Stephen's email power, Trinea's bat, and be able to be that kind of advocate. For now, if it's just a whisper, that's amazing too. So, you know, we have people like Sarah to help you turn that whisper into a roar. So I just want to thank everybody here tonight for coming. Thank you. Have a great night, and we appreciate you so much.